Howdy friends, this is Brad Apple, and this is my buddy Charlie Sandage. Today he's going to talk to us about the history of the Ozark Folk Center.
This area was one of those places in the Ozarks where there seemed to be a deeper well, to put it that way, of the traditional music and crafts and that sort of thing. But people who kept tabs on the economics of a region and so forth would have told you that back in the late 50s, mid-50s, that this was one of those statistically really, really poor areas, which, when the federal government got interested in trying to help, made it eligible for, help in one way or another. And so what happened was that an area extension economics development person got interested in the craft capability that was around here, looking for something that would be economically beneficial to the folks in the area, something they could do. And so they first organized, and this was when the Craft Guild came into being, a crafts fair. And it was held in April, and I think on the grounds of the old school, and maybe there was a tent, and that was in '62. And it was successful. And then somebody had the idea that, well, let's do it again next year, but if we added music. So they went to Jimmy Driftwood and said, could you've got some connections. And he first tried to get some of his Nashville connections down here. Yeah, then they weren't interested for one reason or another. And then he said, you know what? We've got musicians around here, old-time musicians. A lot of them put their fiddle in the closet and all that, but let's see what we can do. So they began. A lot of people, got their fiddles and banjos out and dusted them off, and they started meeting every Friday night at a doctor's office. That was before I was ever around here. I think his name was Cubbins. I think it was Dr. Cubbins' office. Then after a while, people started coming and listening to these Friday night practices, and it got too big for the doctor's office, and so they wound up, if it was good weather, playing on the front steps of the courthouse. And then in the winter, they would move up to the big old courtroom upstairs in the courthouse, and people from all around started coming to the Friday night, picking at Mountain View. It got to be a thing. And so the notion, and there were a lot of economic development people involved in all of this. Yeah, let's see if we can get funding to build a pavilion to house all of this and the annual crafts and music festival. So this went on from the late 50s on through the 60s, and the whole festival thing grew. And the plan for what was going to get built kept growing. A proposal would go in, it would get turned down, and when it would get submitted again, it was bigger. And finally, the complex that is now the Ozark Folk Center was what was planned. But it was not planned to be a state park. It was there was the organization based in New Jersey that got the contract to build the facility was going to operate the facility. And it was going to be mainly a retreat conference center. And then out in front was going to be this little craft village just for the drop-in tourists. And maybe some music going to be played there. That was the idea. And it turned out that that company, right about the time they finished construction in let's say 72 going into 73, went bankrupt. So there they sat with the facility near completed and no funds, but they got the contract to operate it, but they didn't have the capital to do it. So what's going to be done? Jimmy Drifter was chair of the Parks, Recreation, and Travel Commission at the time. He had become very visible as an ambassador for Arkansas. And he suggested to state parks that maybe this could be a state park. From that point, it got into state politics. Bill Henderson was the Parks, Recreation, and Travel Director at the time. And he kind of led what was a fight in the legislature about, it wasn't ever built for that, and that don't know if that's going to work out. And it got a lot of opposition, but it finally did get approved to be operated as a state park. And in the spring of 73, Governor Bumper signed the legislation on the first day of March. And the idea was to get open by the third weekend in April, which had become the time for the festival. That was 45 days. And none of the little craft buildings were just bare bones. So the few of us who had become employees of state parks by that time, with the idea of coming here and getting the thing started, Tom Simmons was really, they had hired him in the planning department. He had been the mayor here, and he had been very much involved in the whole process, and he was going to be the general manager. But the Craft Guild had identified people, and of course the Rackensack Folklore Society had the musicians. Still, it was a scramble. 45 days to opening. But we got open on the third weekend of April in 73, and here we are right now this year observing the 50th anniversary of the Ozark Folk Center.